Right now, as you are watching this, a fire called the Okawa Butte Fire is burning just 22 miles northwest of Bend, Oregon, close enough to the town of Sisters that it has been designated the nation's top priority wildfire, a label that exists specifically because of how close a fire sits to people, not because of its size. It has already destroyed 2 homes and scorched 42 square miles since a bolt of lightning started it on the 16th of July. It is not even the largest fire burning in the region right now. That distinction belongs to the Roe Creek complex, sparked by lightning just 1 day earlier, which has already burned through 300 square miles of Oregon forest and was only 30% contained as firefighters raced to build lines ahead of a fresh round of dry, windy weather. As of the most recent regional count, 45 separate large fires are burning across Oregon and Washington at the same time, 32 of them in Oregon alone. And together, they have already burned through more than 1.7 million acres. This is the story of the dangerous fire emergency now unfolding across the Pacific Northwest, why it exploded so fast, and why officials in the region are already calling this one of Oregon's most destructive and most expensive wildfire seasons on record. No hype, no exaggeration, just what the data says and why it matters. Drop a comment and tell me, if smoke from any of this has reached where you live, I rate every one of these. If you want grounded wildfire coverage instead of panic headlines, subscribe, it is free. And a like helps this reach more people who need to understand this before it gets worse. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Thank you. Now let us get into it. To understand how this emergency built so quickly, you have to go back to the conditions the region was already sitting in before a single fire even started. According to the Northwest Coordination Center, the Pacific Northwest entered this part of the year already in drought, with record low to near record low snowpack across most of the region and above normal temperatures through the spring and early summer. Snowpack matters far more than most people realize because a thin winter snowpack means less meltwater soaking into the ground through spring, which means the soil and the vegetation growing out of it dry out weeks earlier than usual. The National Interagency Fire Center issued a dedicated fuels and fire behavior advisory for the region, warning that this combination, thin winter snowpack layered on top of an ongoing drought, had already pushed live and dead fuel moisture. Levels down to what the region normally sees in mid-August, roughly a full month ahead of the calendar. In plain terms, the forest was already primed to burn like it was late summer while it was still only the middle of July, which meant that whatever ignition source eventually showed up was always going to find fuel far more ready to burn than it should have been at that point in the season. Then, in the middle of July, the trigger arrived, and it arrived in a particularly dangerous form. A series of dry thunderstorms swept across Oregon and Washington, the kind that produce plenty of lightning but almost no rain reaching the ground, because the rain evaporates in the hot, dry air before it ever hits the forest floor. According to the National Interagency Fire Center and regional incident management teams, those storms fired off thousands of lightning strikes across the 2 states in a matter of days. Dry lightning is considered one of the most dangerous wildfire triggers precisely because it offers no accompanying moisture to counteract the ignition, unlike a normal thunderstorm that douses whatever it sparks. Dozens of new wildfires ignited almost simultaneously across both states. On the 15th of July, one of those strikes hit what would become the Roe Creek complex in and around the Ochoco National Forest. On the 16th, another struck what would become the Okawa Butte Fire near Sisters. Within about a week, the region had gone from a handful of scattered new starts to a genuine multi-fire outbreak. A report from the 17th of July already counted more than 3 dozen active wildfires burning across Oregon and Washington combined, most of them started by lightning with no single fire yet classified as a megafire. Instead, the defining feature of that early stage was breadth, more than a dozen separate fires in the 1,000 to 8,000 acre range burning at once, several already forcing level 3, go now evacuation orders in different communities across both states simultaneously. Washington's own legislature had actually doubled its firefighting budget heading into the season specifically, anticipating exactly this kind of stretched multi-front scenario, and Oregon had already invoked its Emergency Conflagration Act 3 separate times before the month was even half over. By the 24th of July, the picture had already gotten worse. Incident reports out of Central Oregon that day counted 67 separate wildland fires burning across the Pacific Northwest, with incident management resources described as very limited, forcing existing management teams to take command of additional new fires, because there were not enough dedicated teams to Cottonwood Fire, southeast of the John Day River near Devil's Butte Road, showed just how fast conditions could turn a small start into a serious threat. Winds gusting to 35 miles per hour pushed that fire past 10,000 acres within hours of it being reported, throwing embers far out ahead of the main fire and forcing engines, hand crews, dozers, aircraft, and local ranchers into an immediate initial attack alongside official firefighting resources. By the following report, the Cottonwood Fire had grown to 14,504 acres and remained at 0% containment, with nearly 1,000 personnel and pieces of equipment assigned to it alone, including 28 hand crews, 53 engines, and 13 bulldozers. The two fires drawing the most national attention through this period, though, were Roe Creek and Okawa Butte, and they represent two very different kinds of danger that officials have to weigh completely differently when deciding where to send. Limited resources. Roe Creek is a size problem. By the 25th of July, it had burned through roughly 300 square e-miles, about 777 square kilometers, since being sparked by lightning on the 15th. And while firefighters made real progress building containment lines along its northern edge, strong winds pushed the fire's southern end outward again after spot fires jumped those. Same containment lines, according to Thad Niebel, an operations chief with the Federal Incident Management Team assigned to the fire. The blaze has also forced the United States Forest Service to expand emergency closures across national forest lands, roads, and trails throughout the Ochoco National Forest, cutting off recreational access to a huge stretch of public land during the peak of summer. Okawa Butte, by contrast, is a proximity problem. At 42 square miles, it is far smaller than Roe Creek, but its location so close to Sisters and the broader Bend area is exactly why it earned the designation as the nation's top priority wildfire, a status that, according to Oregon Governor Tina Kotek, unlocks access to firefighting resources from other states and other countries, specifically because of how many people live in its path. Kotek noted publicly that Roe Creek and Okawa Butte were far from the only significant fires the state was dealing with at once, and said every available firefighter and every piece of firefighting equipment in Oregon was already committed to the field, a statement that underlines just how thin the E-State's own resources had already been stretched before outside help even arrived. Elsewhere in the region, the same lightning outbreak sparked fires in very different terrain, each one testing a different part of the firefighting system. The Grasshopper Fire, burning in Mount Hood National Forest, grew past 4,500 acres and became one of the fires to receive a FEMA Fire Management Assistance Grant, federal funding specifically designed to help cover the cost of fighting a fire that threatens to become a major disaster. It was not, though, season's first such grant. That distinction belongs to the Lower Dry Creek Fire in Umatilla County, which forced more than 1,650 residents under go-now evacuation orders and became the first wildfire in Oregon this year to receive that same federal designation. In Washington, TWO lightning-caused fires, the Luna Fire and the Border 2 Fire, ignited in the remote backcountry of North Cascades National Park, prompting trail and area closures while land. Weighed whether to fight those particular fires directly or manage them more passively, given how remote and difficult to access that terrain is, a decision land managers in wilderness areas often have to make when sending crews imposes more risk than letting a fire burn under close observation. And in Jefferson County, the Bench Fire near Warm Springs triggered Level 3 go-now evacuations after wind-driven fire behavior pushed it aggressively toward the community, becoming, according to regional fire tracking, the 10th time in 2026 alone that Oregon's Emergency Conflagration Act had been invoked. That number matters on its own. As recently as the 17th of July, that same act had only been invoked 3 times all season. Watching it climb from 3 invocations to 10 in roughly 2 weeks is, on its own, a fairly direct measurement of how quickly this emergency accelerated. And it is a number state officials track specifically because each invocation represents a fire serious enough to require the state's most significant firefighting mobilization. By the 28th of July, the regional total had reached more than 1.7 million acres burned across Oregon and Washington combined, according to the Northwest Coordination Center, with 45 large fires still active, 32 in Oregon and 13 in Washington. Oregon's own tracking put the state's individual total at more than 1.5 million acres actively burning across 32 large fires, under conditions described as 90-degree heat, wind gusts over 30 miles per hour, and relative humidity sitting in the single digits, with red flag warnings meaning conditions capable of producing extreme, fast-moving fire behavior, in effect across much of the region. State officials have said openly that 2026 is on track to become Oregon's most expensive wildfire suppression year in more than a decade, a cost that raises real questions about long-term funding and forest management heading into future seasons, since suppression spending on this scale draws directly from budgets that would otherwise go toward the prevention work, thinning, prescribed burns, and fuel reduction that could lower the severity of the next season. The Northwest Coordination Center's own spokesperson, Lauren Maloney, described her agency's job at this point as sorting out competition for resources between fires, deciding which blaze gets when there are simply not enough of any of them to go around for every fire burning at once, a triage process that becomes harder every time a new fire ignites somewhere else in the region. Here is the comparison that actually puts this in perspective, because it reveals something that is easy to miss if you only look at Oregon and Washington in isolation. Nationally, across the entire United States, wildfire tracking for 2026 shows a little over 2 million hectares burned so far this year, which is actually 63% below the 20-year national average. In other words, if you zoomed out to look at the whole country, 2026 would not look like a severe wildfire year at all. It is the Pacific Northwest specifically, Oregon and Washington in particular, that has been hit disproportionately hard, precisely because of the specific local combination that set the stage, that record low snowpack, that ongoing regional drought, and that mid-July lightning outbreak landing directly on top of already primed fuel. Elsewhere in the western United States, individual severe fires were still making headlines of their own, including Utah's first megafire in 8 years, and one of Colorado's largest wildfires on record. And the Knowles fire on the Colorado-Utah border, already fully extinguished by this point, had claimed the life of a fourth firefighter from injuries sustained while it burned. But those were scattered, individual severe events, rather than the kind of region-wide simultaneous outbreak now defining Oregon and Washington. This is not a story about the whole country having a terrible fire year. It is a story about one region's very specific conditions colliding at exactly the wrong moment. This also is not an entirely new pattern for the region either, which is part of why officials describe this year's scale as so alarming. In 2025, the Burgoyne fire burned along the Washington and Oregon border near White Salmon and Lyle, destroying more estimated $25 million in damage after igniting in the middle of July, the same time of year this year's outbreak began. And the region's benchmark for a truly catastrophic single event remains the Labor Day fires of 2020, when more than 1 million acres burned in Oregon alone during a single week of extreme wind-driven fire behavior, a scale of destruction that reshaped how the state thinks about wildfire risk entirely and led directly to the kind of expanded Emergency Conflagration Act framework the state is now relying on again in 2026. 2026 is not yet at that single week, 1 million acre scale, but the current trajectory, 67 fires, is of late July climbing to 45 large fires and 1.7 million acres regionally within days, is exactly the kind of acceleration that officials watching the Emergency Conflagration Act invocations climb from 3 to 10 in 2 weeks are worried could still get there if the current heat, wind, and humidity pattern holds through August. The human toll of a season like this extends well beyond the acreage totals, too. Thick smoke has pushed air quality to unhealthy levels across parts of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, forcing people well outside the immediate fire zones to deal with the consequences of a blaze burning hundreds of miles away, closing schools, canceling outdoor events, and pushing hospitals to see more patients with respiratory complaints than usual. Thousands of residents have been placed under go-now evacuation orders across multiple counties simultaneously, from Umatilla County's Lower Dry Creek fire to the Bench fire near Warm Springs, meaning entire communities have had to pack up and leave with only minutes of warning more than once already this season. Harsh wildfire weather, the same low humidity, strong wind conditions that make fires spread fastest, also grounds the aircraft firefighters depend on to slow those same fires down, meaning the exact weather that makes a fire most dangerous is often the weather that takes away one of the most effective tools available for fighting it, leaving ground crews to hold the line with hand tools and engines while conditions are at their worst. So what does all of this actually mean if you live anywhere in Oregon, Washington, or the broader Pacific Northwest right now? It means this is not a single fire to watch and wait out. It is a genuine multi-fire outbreak spread across an entire region at once, competing for the same limited pool of crews, engines, aircraft, and dozers, at a moment when officials say every available resource in the state is already committed. It means the conditions that produced this, record low snowpack and drought pushing fuel moisture to late summer levels a month early, are the kind of setup meteorologists and fire behavior analysts will be watching for again in future seasons. Not a one-time fluke specific to this year alone. And it means, per the numbers themselves, that while the nation as a whole is actually having a below-average wildfire year, the Pacific Northwest specifically is living through one of its most severe and most expensive seasons in over a decade, a distinction that matters enormously for how the region plans, budgets, and staffs for the seasons still to come. So here is the honest, grounded summary. A dry lightning outbreak in the middle of July ignited dozens of new fires across an Oregon and Washington landscape that was already primed to burn thanks to record low snowpack and ongoing drought. Within about 2 weeks. That outbreak grew from 3 dozen scattered fires into 45 large active blazes burning more than 1.7 million acres combined, headlined by the enormous Roe Creek complex and the community-threatening Akawa Butte fire. while Oregon's Emergency Conflagration Act, a direct measure of how many times the state has had to formally escalate its response, climbed from 3 invocations to 10 in a matter of days. It is happening even as the nation overall sits well below its 20-year wildfire average, making this a distinctly regional emergency rather than a nationwide one. And Oregon officials are already calling IT on track to be the state's most expensive fire suppression season in more than 10 years, arriving on top of a 2025 season that had already destroyed more than 100 structures along the same state border. We will keep tracking this the same way we did today, straight from the National Interagency Fire Center, the Northwest Coordination Center, and the incident. Management teams actually fighting these fires on the ground, not recycled headlines. Subscribe so you do not miss how this develops, because based on the wind and humidity conditions still in the forecast, this is very likely not finished yet. And leave that comment below. Tell me whether you are anywhere near the smoke or the fire lines yourselves right now. Because behind every one of these numbers is a firefighter building a containment line by hand along Roe Creek's northern edge, a family in Sisters watching a fire crawl closer to their home, FOR, the second week in a row, and a dispatcher in Portland deciding, right now, which of 40. Firefighters gets the next available engine, 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.